They didn't even lower their voices when they said it. Roxanne Kirby should have stayed invisible. People like her only make things worse. I stood there, pretending the words didn't land, pretending they weren't slicing through me in front of everyone. But something inside me cracked that day, not from the insult itself, but from realizing they meant it every careless syllable, every dismissive glance. And I remember thinking one thing, clear as a siren in my skull. If they ever found out what I knew, they'd wish I had stayed invisible. The first sting came fast, long before I learned anyone's name. It hit me during the evaluation briefing. In that cramped room where fluorescent lights hummed louder than the people inside it, I walked in, hoping Coronado might be different from the places I'd left behind. But the hope barely had time to settle before it cracked. The senior officer didn't glare or shout. He didn't need theatrics. He simply glanced from the screen to me, and his voice dropped a cold judgment that felt sharper than anything I deserved. The others didn't look away. They watched, waiting for the moment I'd fold, like this was some kind of ritual newcomers were supposed to endure. And maybe it was. Maybe I should have been used to it, but humiliation has a way of feeling fresh every time, even when you think you've built calluses. When I stepped out of that room, it felt as if my uniform collar tightened, reminding me I wasn't here to be seen, only assessed, corrected, dismissed. I swallowed the urge to defend myself. No one would have listened anyway. The barracks assigned to me on the south end of the base weren't much thin walls, metal beds that groaned with every shift of weight, and a draft that never quite stopped leaking in. I sat on my mattress, tracing the letters of my name patch, wondering if anyone here would ever use it without some edge attached. Then the duty schedule slid under my door. A night shift at the relay station by the waterline, quiet, isolated, forgettable, or so I thought. I didn't know that single assignment would drag me straight into the center of something none of them were prepared to face. The relay station felt like a forgotten corner of the base, tucked so far down the shoreline that even the gulls seemed to avoid it. By the time I stepped inside for my first night shift, the rest of Coronado had gone quiet, buried under layers of darkness and distant engine noise. The equipment, at least, sounded steady, predictable, a steady hum that didn't ask anything of me. For the first hour, nothing happened. Then, at exactly 0027, the screen flickered just a soft twitch, like a muscle beneath the skin. I leaned in, wondering if fatigue was playing tricks on me. But then it returned at 0054, and again at 0121, the same tiny ripple, repeating with the precision of a heartbeat. I checked the surrounding traffic, no vessels near enough to cause interference. Nothing airborne, nothing scheduled. The log showed a clean sheet, almost too clean. According to the system, nothing had happened at all. I told myself it was nothing. Coronado had its quirks, or so I'd been told. But the timing gnawed at me. I ran a manual check, then scribbled the exact timestamps on the back of my notebook, unwilling to let the data slip through my fingers. The next morning, I brought it to Kellen. He barely stopped walking. One glance at the screen, a dismissive grunt, and he brushed past me as if the conversation had already wasted too much of his time. It should have ended there. But when I returned that night and watched the fourth pulse hit at the exact second I expected, something in my chest tightened. Static never repeats itself with that kind of discipline. People do. Whatever this was. It wasn't the ocean whispering. Something or someone was tapping a pattern into the Navy's bloodstream, and I was the only one who had seen it. I went back Tuesday morning, expecting to find the same strange rhythm waiting for me. Instead, the log greeted me with a blank slate. Not empty erased, no timestamps, no anomalies, not even a hint that anything had ever flickered across those screens. Even the metadata was gone. My hand tightened around the edge of the console as a cold, creeping realization worked its way up my spine. Systems don't wipe themselves. Someone had done it manually, and they had done it well. I reached for the old laptop I kept tucked in my bag, the one that wasn't tied into any Navy network and couldn't be scrubbed remotely. When I pulled up the notes I'd saved, the pattern was still there, each interval aligned like stepping stones leading to a place I wasn't meant to see. On a hunch, I cross-referenced open band signals from other coastal stations, first Point Loma, then La Jolla, finally Silver Strand. Each one showed the same repeating pulse, the same exact timing, as if the entire coastline was breathing in sync. I sank into the nearest chair, the weight of the discovery pressing on my shoulders. This wasn't a glitch. This was coordination. I headed back to my locker, mind racing, only to find the door hanging slightly ajar. My uniform tops were out of place, shoved aside. A small scrap of paper waited in the corner, torn from a cheap notepad. 4 words, jagged and hurried. Stop pulling threads. No name, no fingerprint smudges, nothing to tie it to anyone. But my hands shook anyway, because the message didn't feel like a warning. It felt like someone letting me know they were already closer than I realized. By the next morning, the note in my locker felt less like a warning and more like a hand closing around my ribs. The moment I stepped into the building, conversations thinned out. People avoided my eyes, the way you avoid stepping into a crack you know is deeper than it looks. Kellen appeared everywhere I turned, at the far end of the communications hallway. Standing so still, I almost walked past him. In the break room, his reflection hovered in the glass behind the vending machine, in the server room. His shadow stretched across the equipment like it belonged there. Not once did his gaze flicker, not once did he pretend he wasn't tracking me. That afternoon, a readiness report landed in my inbox. My name sat beside an error I hadn't made during a shift I hadn't worked, signed by the same man who'd been haunting my steps all morning. It wasn't sloppy. It was intentional, clean enough to raise suspicion without leaving any trace I could fight. When I asked Davis about it, he wouldn't lift his head. His voice shook as he muttered that some things weren't worth digging into. Hearing fear in someone else's breath does something cold to you. It settles under the skin. I went back to the relay station hoping for clarity, only to watch a log file vanish the moment I opened it. Not a system failure, someone was actively reaching in and deleting it right under my hands. By the time I stepped outside, the sky had dimmed to bruised orange. A gust rattled a loose chain near a supply container, and when I turned, a figure stood half hidden behind it, not moving, not startled, just watching. The base suddenly felt too small, too exposed, too aware of my presence. This wasn't paranoia. Someone was following me closely enough to breathe down the back of my thoughts. I stopped trusting any system tied to Coronado and powered up the old laptop I'd brought from home. When I loaded the timestamps I'd written by hand, the intervals aligned perfectly 27 minutes, every single time. Curiosity curdled into dread when I checked the feeds from other stations. Point Loma pulsed, La Jolla pulsed, Silver Strand pulsed, all identical. 4 days, no drift, no randomness, only intent. Digging deeper into the receiver module, I found an odd firmware tag buried beneath the listed version, FW PV29 RCH, something that didn't belong to any Navy build. Anything that deep in the system had to be placed there from the inside. Tracing the tag led me into an old archived report, Project Valiant, Phase 2.9, a discontinued program testing hidden signal routing. One engineer had been dismissed, vanished before his hearing, and the investigation fizzled out. His name stayed with me, Frederick Ames, because the pattern I'd found felt like a fingerprint left behind years later. A heavy step made me snap the laptop shut just as Kellen appeared in the doorway. His presence a warning more pointed than his words. The message was clear enough: stop digging. When he left, I reopened the laptop and combined all 6 data streams into one. The signals curved together like a single pulse sewn across the coastline, coordinated, deliberate, alive. Not a glitch, not a rogue technician, a structure, a test, a rehearsal. And I had walked straight into it, ever since the 6-station map revealed itself on my screen. The air around me felt heavier, as if the base itself had learned my name for all the wrong reasons. The moment I stepped into the communications building, conversations thinned out like someone had pulled a plug. No one looked at me directly, but the silence that followed my footsteps was louder than any accusation. Every time I turned a corner, I caught the tail end of a whisper, "Don't get involved with her. They're watching. She pushed too far." It was the kind of quiet rejection that didn't need to be spoken aloud to cut deep. People drifted away from me the way you instinctively avoid a live wire. Then my shift board changed. No email, no briefing, no explanation. Just a single sheet pinned to the duty roster with my name scratched off the main relay station and shoved onto Module E17, a backup unit we barely touched, unless something had gone very wrong. I didn't need anyone to spell it out. Whoever ordered the switch didn't want a trail, and, whoever they were, they wanted me out of the way. The internal report hit next. A flagged incident claiming I might have mishandled restricted data, pending review. The kind of accusation that could end a career without anyone raising their voice. I stared at the screen, pulse steady but cold. I had never touched anything outside my clearance, yet there it was, written as if someone had been taking notes on a version of me that didn't exist. E17 sat on the far side of the building. Its door scraped and dented like someone had forced tools into the lock more than once. The air inside was colder than the rest of the facility, carrying the faint scent of ozone, the metallic tang left behind when equipment has been pushed into a mode it wasn't built for. 2 ceiling sensors were dead, their indicator lights dark. Someone had killed their power, not an accident. A scan of the subsystem confirmed what I already feared. E17 had been pinged with the same signature as the 27-minute pattern, not from outside the network straight into the core of the module, as if someone was slowly feeding poison through a capillary line, testing how fast it spread. And when I opened the waveform, the truth hit harder than any reprimand. The familiar pulse sat on the left steady, predictable, recognizable. But the right side carried something new, a second sequence layered beneath it, probing the system's limits, as if measuring which component would collapse first if the real attack ever launched. This wasn't a stray signal, it was a test chamber, and the person running that experiment was inside this base. I returned to the relay station late that night, long after most of the base had settled into uneasy sleep. The lights inside flickered as I powered up the analysis tools, the room dimming in a way that felt unnatural, like the system was being siphoned from somewhere unseen. My nerves tightened. Interference didn't usually feel intentional. I pushed the waveform to full view, and the 27-minute pulse stretched across the screen. Then something new emerged beneath it: binary modulation. Faint but deliberate. The pattern I'd been chasing wasn't the whole message, it was merely the envelope. The real payload hid in the second layer, only visible when all 6 stations aligned. Whoever built this wasn't trying to disrupt one relay. They were trying to bridge the entire coastal system into a single override command. Just as that realization settled in, footsteps echoed from the hallway. I braced myself for Kellen, but when I stepped toward the doorway, I saw him being pulled away by another officer, confusion tightening his face. It wasn't the expression of a man orchestrating a sophisticated attack. It was the expression of someone being used. And just like that, the ground shifted. Kellen wasn't the architect. He was a guard dog who didn't understand what he'd been ordered to protect. Back at my console, a new spike of panic shot through me. My workstation had been logged into from somewhere else. When I traced the breach, the path pointed straight to E17. Whoever was hiding behind that module wasn't just watching me, they were using my credentials as a shield, a way to smear my name and mask their own tracks. The binary override layer carried a timer tucked deep in the code, a countdown so faint it almost blended into the data stream. 18 hours and 44 minutes. When it hit 0, every system across the California coastline would receive a foreign signal. No warning, no oversight, no guarantee that the Pacific Fleet would be able to respond. And then the final piece locked into place. The signal originated from Coronado. The modifications began in E17. The rogue firmware had been injected from an internal device. The person behind this, whoever continued the work Frederick Ames left unfinished, wasn't a ghost or an outsider. He was here, close, breathing the same air. The timer ticked on. Implacable, I stared at it, knowing only one path remained. Tomorrow morning, the Admiral would convene the readiness briefing, and that room would be the only place left where the truth had a chance to survive long enough to matter. Morning settled over Coronado in a pale, muted haze, the kind that made every breath feel sharper than it should. I walked toward the readiness room, counting down in my head 17 hours until the second layer code triggered. My pulse matched the rhythm, tighter with each step. Inside, the room was packed, the air thick with tension and routine discipline. Screens glowed a reassuring green, broadcasting the same calm facade they always did. Then Admiral Thomas Winston entered, and silence took over as if someone had cut the sound from the world. The readiness report read flawlessly. No anomalies, no warnings, all systems nominal. I knew better. As the meeting neared its end, something inside me snapped into place, a thin, dangerous line between fear and necessity. I stood. A single chair scraped the floor, loud in the dead-still room. Every head swung toward me. My voice didn't shake. "Admiral, there's data missing from this report." Winston studied me, unreadable, then motioned me forward. I opened my father's old laptop and projected the 6-station signal map, the 27-minute pattern, the hidden binary layer, the code bridge linking the coastline like a pulse. The room froze. Winston leaned in, eyes narrowing. He whispered so only I heard. "I saw this once. Hawaii. Before a tech died." A sharp intake of breath rippled across the room. Then his voice cracked through the tension like a hammer. "Lock down the system." Immediately, Kellen was pulled forward, white as salt. When pressed, he said nothing, only stared at me and muttered that I had no idea who truly wrote the code. A chill swept through me. Standing up hadn't been the climax. The real climax was realizing I'd just ignited a national investigation. Coronado went into lockdown so fast it felt like the walls themselves shifted. Armed guards sealed corridors. Access badges stopped working, and the air turned sharp with urgency. I was escorted straight to a makeshift analysis room where the NIS team was already hunched over terminals. Despite being the lowest-ranking tech in the building, I was the only one holding data. They couldn't erase the readings from my improvised sensor, untouched by naval systems. That alone put me in the center seat. The moment we peeled back the second layer of the pattern, the room seemed to tense. The code wasn't chaotic. It was intentional, winding through itself like a labyrinth designed by someone who understood not just machines, but human hesitation. I recognized the structure immediately. It mirrored fragments I had studied in the remnants of Project Valiant Phase 2.9. Back when I dug through old archives, no one else bothered opening. One name had been etched into those files like a scar: Frederick Ames, a civilian engineer who vanished before he could be prosecuted. A man whose work had nearly destabilized a weapons test years ago. The deeper we traced, the clearer the connection became. Metadata from Module E17 revealed the latest update came from an external device running a firmware signature tied directly to Ames-1 he created in 2017. He hadn't disappeared. He hadn't died. He had been building a new version of Valiant in the shadows, silently drilling into the coastal system for 9 months. Mapping every weakness like a surgeon preparing for an operation. Coronado wasn't his target. Neither were the 6 stations. He wanted the entire Pacific navigation grid. 20 minutes of control would be enough to trigger absolute chaos. We worked without stopping. Every second shaved off the countdown mattered. My familiarity with the pattern's rhythm guided the team. Pulse by pulse, until we reached the final cluster. Winston stood behind me as I locked the last thread of code. If she hadn't caught this, we'd have lost the whole coast. His voice carried the weight of what almost happened. The timer froze at 7 minutes. 7 minutes from catastrophe. 7 minutes from losing everything. The ceremony the next morning wasn't grand or loud. It didn't need to be. It took place in the operations room where we had spent the night before tearing through lines of hostile code. Monitors still glowed softly, casting long shadows across the exhausted faces of the people who had stood shoulder to shoulder with me through every second of the countdown. No photographers, no applause, just quiet breaths and the hum of equipment that, for once, wasn't lying to us. Admiral Winston stepped forward carrying a small navy blue case. He held it with both hands, not like an award, but like something that carried weight beyond metal and ribbon. When he pressed it into my palms, his eyes steadied on mine with a sincerity that almost made me look away. "Rank didn't save this system yesterday. You did." He pinned the Navy Commendation Medal onto my uniform himself. The touch was light, but it felt heavier than anything I had ever worn. My throat tightened, not from pride, but from the startling realization that for the first time in my entire career, someone truly saw me, not as background, not as an afterthought, but as someone who mattered. After the ceremony, Winston walked with me to the end of the corridor. His voice dropped slightly as he mentioned a transfer cyber defense task unit. Pacific, a team built for the kind of threat we had just survived. I stepped outside and looked toward the horizon where the antennas lined the shore like silent guardians. And for once, I didn't feel buried under their height. I felt level with them. That night, I wandered down to the beach, letting the cold wind brush against my skin. The ocean felt calmer than it had in weeks. I called my mother in Oregon. When she answered, I didn't tell her about the medal or the Admiral or the system we saved. I just said the one truth that had been lodged in my chest for years. Mom, I finally did something right. There was a pause, then a soft, trembling breath on the other end. The sun rose slowly, washing the water in soft pink light. I stayed there long enough to feel the warmth seep into my bones, the last remnants of fear dissolving with the tide. I wasn't the lowest-ranking tech anymore. I wasn't invisible. I stood up when it mattered, and no one could take that from me. 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 No one could